Let's talk some chess. This is a really exciting, intense game. Garry Kasparov with the white pieces. He's playing Veselin Topalov in 1999, and Kasparov opens up with e4. Topalov plays d6. Kasparov claims more of a share of the center with d4, and black puts his knight on f6. Kasparov responds with his own knight to c3. Black prepares to fee and Keto his bishop with g7, plays g6, preparing for bishop to g7. And Kasparov develops his own dark square bishop to e3. Black fianchettos his bishop as prepared, and Kasparov plays queen to d2, connecting the queen and the bishop. Black plays c6. Kasparov adds more support to the central pawn by playing f3, and black goes for some explosion on the queen's side, playing b5. Now this kind of nice pawn structure, preventing white from advancing more on the queen's side. Kasparov brings his other knight to e2, nicely connecting the knights, and black does similar, putting his own knight on d7. And here Kasparov jumps in with bishop to h6. You probably want to trade this dark square bishop off because black's bishop is very powerful sitting here. Fianchettoed, once this knight moves, it'll be a very dangerous bishop, and Kasparov has no interest in dealing with that, so puts his bishop on h6, and black obliges and makes the trade. And now the queen sits on h6, which is not not a great square. It's not a central square for the queen, but it is preventing black from castling kingside. So black puts his other bishop on b7, fianchettoing yet another bishop, and Kasparov here plays a3. And black strikes in the center with e5. Kasparov ignores it, castles queenside. This was maybe another reason he wanted to get rid of this bishop on g7, because you don't want it bearing down on your castled king. And here, black completes development with queen to e7. Kasparov plays king to b1. This is always a nice defensive move when you castle kingside. And here, white plays a6, kind of, again, this weird sort of pawn structure on the queen side. And Kasparov brings his knight to c1. So this knight actually started on g1, then it came to e2, and e2 wasn't an amazing square for it because it sort of wasn't in the game. It was blocking the light squared bishop, but now you've maneuvered it to c1, and soon it will be on b3, where it will be much more helpful in Kasparov developing an attack. So black now castles queenside. Didn't really have a choice if you wanted to castle, because obviously the white queen is preventing castling on the king side, and now the knight's journey is nearly complete. The knight has come all the way from g1 to e2 to c1, and now sits nicely on b3. Black makes his first exchange in the center. I think this actually is the first piece. No, the bishops were traded off. This is the second piece is taken, so takes on d4, and Kasparov takes it back with the rook, but black forces the rook back to the first rank with c5, and Kasparov retreats the rook. Now black puts his own knight on b6, trying to get some more pieces closer to Kasparov's king. And here Kasparov plays g3, which opens up a nice avenue for his light squared bishop. Black sees this. He doesn't want the bishop coming to h3 with tempo, so he moves the king out of harm's way to b8. And here the knight that Kasparov has spent so long sort of getting to this side of the board kind of finishes its journey and ends at a5, where it's going to be very instrumental in the attack that Kasparov is hoping to generate. And it's kind of funny because this knight started on b1 and just moved to b1, whereas this knight started on g1 and took many moves to get to this side of the board. So kind of funny how these things work. Black doesn't want to lose his light squared bishop, so he retreats it to a8. It was under attack, of course, from the knight. And Kasparov says, okay, I'm going to develop my own light squared bishop to h3. And don't forget about this bishop, because it's a long-range bishop, easy to kind of miss, but it will play a pivotal role in preventing the king from getting to that c8 square. It'll be very helpful in Kasparov's attack. Here, black wants to open the center a little bit more, apparently, so he plays d5, and Kasparov takes the opportunity, now that this diagonal has opened up, to bring his queen back into the game with f4. The queen wasn't doing too much on h4. Previously, it was preventing the king from castling kingside, but now it's not really involved in the game, and this gets it back into the game with tempo. The king retreats to a7, And now Kasparov brings his other rook into the game, so now all of his pieces are doing something. This rook is lined up nicely with the queen, so black has to be careful about any discovered attacks. As such, black pushes his d pawn, so sort of closing this to any potential discoveries from the rook. But Kasparov really insists, and he puts his knight on d5. And this knight is attacked about 1,000,000 times, not by the queen. 1,000,000 minus 1 times by both knights, the rook and the bishop, and indeed black does take it, and Kasparov takes back on d5. And it looks like you can take the pawn for free, but you can't because this has just opened up a discovered attack of the rook on the queen. So black moves his queen to safety to d6 and prepares to take this pawn once and for all. But that's actually not what happened, because this is where Kasparov played the crazy move to open up this game and take it to the new level and get an awesome attack going. So take a second and see if you can find this move. Okay, if you found it, kudos to you. This is I would never even think to see this move. Kasparov played rook takes pawn on d4. And this just looks totally out of left field. Doesn't seem like you're achieving much, and you're sacrificing an entire rook for a pawn. And black said, "Thank you very much. I will take that rook, please." The issue with this move is it allows. So first of all, the E file had been opened, and now Kasparov is able to play this rook to e7 check, and it seems like this is another free rook. It seems like Kasparov has just sacrificed both his rooks, but if you take this with the queen, checkmate is soon going to follow, because Kasparov has eliminated these two pawns that were sort of protecting this diagonal from the queen. So the queen takes on d4, and this is kind of a similar theme that we saw a couple of moves ago, where the queen came back to f4 after the pawn moved and was able to deliver check. The same idea here, queen comes to d4, delivers check, and the king only has one square to go to, because this knight, this sneaky knight on a5 is taking away the b7 square, and so the king is forced to retreat to b2. Then the queen comes to b6, and this is terrible for black. The king can't move anywhere, it can't go to either of these squares, and I told you not to forget about this light square bishop. The bishop is taking away the d8 square, so black has to block. And now this not so sneaky knight comes in on c7, and this is checkmate because the queen is pinned, all of these squares are taken away, and the king is in check. If you block with a bishop, you get the same thing, albeit a little bit slower. Knight comes in on c6, delivering check. King has one square to go to, and then the knight can take the queen if it wants, or more likely, queen just takes on, or queen just moves to a7 and delivers checkmate. So all that being, all that said, you cannot take this this rook on e7 with the queen. You will fall with checkmate. So instead, black moves his king to b8, b6. But this is where Kasparov's idea in sacrificing the rook on d4 comes in. Queen can now take on d4 with unrestricted access, and this is check, and this is a world of trouble for black. So there's not much you can do here. Black plays the most enticing move, which is taking the knight on a5, and already the king is on the 5th rank, which is not something you want when you're playing with the black pieces, and Kasparov is going to draw the king even more into the position, draw the king more into white's home camp, where it's going to be easier to set up an even more devastating attack. So Kasparov continues with this plan with b4, forcing the king to its only available square on a4. Now the king is on the 4th rank. It's in the city limits of the white kings, the white pieces home the 1st rank. So it's driving within the city limits. The 4th rank is within the city limits of the 1st rank. And here Kasparov plays queen to c3. The threat here is obvious. If the queen gets to b3, this will be checkmate because the queen is protected. You can't take these pawns, and you can't retreat to a5 because the b pawn protects that square. So black deals with this by taking on d5, and now the black queen is guarding this b3 square. So you can't put the white queen here and deliver checkmate because you'll be taken by the black queen. But instead, Kasparov is going to threaten mate from the other side by playing rook to a7. And this is a really funny position because the rook is like 3 ranks in behind the black king, which rarely ever happens so early in a game. and you have the king kind of attacked from all sides by, the pawns on the side, the queen in front, the rook in back, and just a really nightmare position to defend for black. So here black puts his bishop on b7. This protects the a6 pawn from the rook delivering checkmate, and the rook says, okay, thank you very much, I will take that bishop. The queen cannot take the rook back, obviously, because then the white queen will just deliver checkmate on b3. So the rook takes, and instead the black queen now comes to c4, begging and hoping for Kasparov to offer, or to take up on that queen trade and take some pieces off the board. Of course, Kasparov says no, and Kasparov just takes the knight on f6. And we're going to see this queen on this diagonal a lot. Again, the white queen is just taking a ton of advantage of the dark square diagonals in this game, and it's going to continue in the endgame. And you can see, even though Kasparov has given up a rook for a pawn and a knight for seemingly nothing, the last two moves he's won back a bishop and a knight, and material is getting close to being equal again. So here, the queen also took the knight, but it also is now threatening checkmate on a6, so checkmates everywhere. The only way to get out of this is for the king to move even more up the board, so to the third rank. Now you're within the city limits of the first rank, and queen takes anyways, and now king takes on b4. Here, Kasparov says, no, you're not running away. You're not getting back to your home base. You're coming to my home base, and he plays c3. King has to take, and now the queen gets back to this awesome diagonal where it's eyeing this rook, which will become important in a second, with queen to a1. King has to, or doesn't have to, but king moves to d2, and now the queen comes to b2. You can't block with the queen because then the white queen just takes, and that's totally fine for white. So instead, the king moves down to d1. You're trying to stay on this d file because it's protected by your rook, but Kasparov is going to make that difficult. Kasparov's next move is not a check, but it is a very deadly move. This bishop, which was so important in preventing the king from escaping, comes to f1. This obviously comes with an attack on the queen, but it also threatens checkmate if the white queen can get to e1. So you have to deal with this. You can't take the bishop because then you get the white queen comes to c2. King has to run to e1, but then the white bishop comes, and this is going to be checkmate after the queen blocks. So you have to deal. You can't take the bishop, but you have to deal with it and move the queen. So instead, again, a queen trade is offered. The rook comes down to d2, threatening black's queen. But Kasparov says, no, I am pinning that rook. It's not often that you see a rook pin a rook, but here the white rook is pinning the black rook to the king, so the black rook cannot move away from the king. And here black says, okay, I will take the rook, but Kasparov says, well, then I'm taking the queen with the bishop. Black takes back, and then the queen, again, remember this diagonal is super important to be lined up on this, and because black's second rook has kind of left the 8th rank, the white queen is able to take the other rook on h8. And now, after all is said and done, Kasparov didn't mate his opponent, but he did force the king all the way to the 1st rank, which is hilarious. The kings are now next to each other. The black king is now on the starting square for the white king on d1, so just well, actually not the starting square. I guess the starting square would be e1, but you get the idea. Basically came all over the all the way from his neighborhood all the way down. It had some horrible castle walk, and ended up here. And in the process, Kasparov didn't mate his opponent, but he did take so much material that this is a completely one-end game. You're down a pawn, but you have a queen for a rook, and this is totally winning for white. So black tried a few more moves. He played d3, hoping to get some chances of promoting this pawn, but Kasparov brings his queen all the way back to a1. Black pushes the pawn, but then the queen comes in the game with a4 check. King has to run away, and then Kasparov starts to push his own pawns. Black says, you're not going to push that pawn anymore, but Kasparov says, fine, I'm going to put my king on c1, and now this is just impossible to play for black. You can't push the pawn because then the queen will take it, and you can't play d1 check, which looks like you'd like to play, but then the queen will just take that as well, so that doesn't work. So black plays rook to d2 check, but then you get queen to a7, and here Topalov with the black pieces resign the game. you're going to get queen to g1 check. Basically, whatever you do, you are not going to be able to promote the pawn. It looks like you like to play rook takes here, but then obviously queen to g1 check forks the rook. So this is just not going to end well for black. So really crazy game, a really interesting and creative attack where white forced the black king up the board, sacrificed a rook for a pawn. It didn't look like it did much, but it clearly made a huge difference. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Drop a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.